A forensic doctor was about to begin the autopsy of a little girl, but what he saw under the scalpel changed everything forever. Before starting the story, write down where you watched it below and enjoy the story. If you like this inspiring video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. The day began like any other at the morgue in San Pedro del Valle. The sun was already beating down on the white walls of the building, and the smell of stale coffee mixed with formaldehyde filled the air. Inside, amid cold corridors and flickering lights, Dr. Ethan Rivas was arranging papers in his clipboard as usual. He had seen it all there: accidents, shootings, tragedies. But that morning, something made him feel strange. Before he started, the stretcher arrived, pushed by two workers with silent footsteps, almost too respectful. There was something in the air. The white sheet covered the entire body. It was small. Ethan, without looking up, signed the admission form. "Who is it?" he asked dryly, as usual. "No ID, doctor, just this." They handed him a wrinkled envelope with a few documents, a formal request from the police to perform an autopsy. According to the report, the body was found in the early morning in a dry field near Rural Road 148. No one nearby, no witnesses, no parked cars, just the body of a girl about 6 years old, with no visible injuries, dead. Ethan slowly let go of the envelope. For some reason, he stared longer than usual at the spread-out sheet. He felt his chest tighten. He had seen children there before, but there was something different about this one. A strange silence, a presence that didn't seem to belong to someone who was dead. "Has the family been notified?" he asked. It was the police themselves who requested the autopsy. It seems that no one knows where she came from. They said it could have been abandonment, or something worse. Ethan ran his hand over his face, took a deep breath, and nodded his head. "Leave her here. I'll take care of it." When the workers left, he was left alone in the room with that small body in front of him. He took off his robe and washed his hands with cold water. The sound of the water filled the room. He dried his eyes with his fingers, hiding a tiredness that was more emotional than physical. Carefully, he lifted the sheet. The girl seemed to be asleep, her skin dark, her long hair dark and dirty with dust. There were small leaves stuck to her dress, as if she had been rolling on the ground. Her fingernails were dirty, as if she had been digging or scratching herself. There were no signs of blows, nothing that could explain it: death. Ethan looked at her again, calmly. There was a kind of peace, but also a silent scream, as if the body wasn't saying everything, as if something was missing. He took a deep breath and looked at the ceiling. The sound of an old clock ticked slowly. Outside, someone was shaking a rug. Everything was the same. But inside him, it wasn't the same. He covered the girl again with the sheet, leaving only her face uncovered, and stood there, a man alone in a cold room, looking at a girl whom no one wanted. No one had looked for her. No one had given her a name. Ethan began to prepare everything as he always did. He washed his hands with soap, put on his gloves slowly, breathing deeply. The white coat already had marks from time. He rolled up his sleeves to his elbows. He turned on the bright ceiling light that illuminated the stretcher. He grabbed the instruments one by one, placing them on the steel table, all calmly, at his own pace, because that was how he was, orderly, and because he respected every body that passed through his hands. He pulled the white sheet carefully, his fingers remaining still for a moment on the fabric. He had seen thousands of bodies, but always, before the first cut, he paused. Silently, out of respect, he looked at the girl again. She looked calm, almost at peace, as if she were really asleep, her lips slightly parted. But there was something that disturbed him. It wasn't something he could see. It was a feeling. He reached out, touched the girl's arm to adjust her better, and then stopped. He took off his right glove, touched her again more firmly this time, frowned, and stared intently. This isn't right. The girl's arm was hot, not warm, really hot, as if she had been brought in minutes ago, as if she still had blood running through her veins. But that made no sense. The body had been there for hours. He took the digital thermometer, placed it under her armpit, and waited a few seconds. 37.4. Ethan stood there without reacting for a few seconds. He looked again. He repeated the process. Same thing. This is impossible, he muttered. He left the room, went into the hallway, and called the transport technician. Hey, how long did it take from the scene to here? About 45 minutes. Why? And did they put her in the chamber as usual? Sure, doctor. Everything normal. He returned to the space room as if he had forgotten something very important. He put his hand on the girl's face. She was hot, her lips a little moist. Her chest seemed a little raised, but still motionless. He grabbed her wrist. Nothing. He put his hand on her neck. He didn't take the scalpel either. His hands were shaking. They had never ever shaken like this before. He adjusted the light, looked at her one last time, and made the first cut in her chest, the red liquid already flowing out. That's when he heard it. A low sound, almost a sigh. But it wasn't coming from the room. It wasn't coming from the light. It was coming from the body. No, he said without a voice. The bisturí fell from his hand. It made a sharp sound as it hit the tile floor. Ethan stood still, his eyes wide open, his heart beating fast. The sound repeated itself. A faint sigh, but real, human. He dropped everything, put his hand on the girl's chest, and felt movement. Small, but there, real. Her heart was beating, slowly, as if fighting with the world to keep going. "She's alive!" he shouted, running to the door and opening it with force. "Call emergency services now!" Ethan placed both hands on the body, trying to stop the bleeding from the cut that had started. The gloves were now red, his eyes filled with tears. Forgive me, my little girl," he whispered. The girl was breathing weakly, almost not at all, but she was breathing. Ethan held the small body in his arms as if it were made of glass. The scalpel was still on the floor, forgotten, and the white sheet, now stained with blood, trembled with every hurried step he took down the cold hallway. He screamed without thinking, just acting. Instinct was stronger than everything else. "Emergency! Open the door! She's alive!" he shouted. The nurses in the clinical area looked at each other confused when they saw the pathologist run into the room with a girl in his arms, desperate. An older nurse, Carmen, ran towards him. "Dr. Ethan, is that a body?" "No," he said, his voice breaking. "She's alive. She's breathing very softly. I made a cut. I heard her. I felt it." They brought the stretcher from the emergency room. They laid her body very carefully on it. Ethan could hardly let go of her. It seemed that if he let go, she would disappear. "Her blood pressure is almost 0, said Carmen, looking at the monitors. Oxygen saturation was dropping. "But there's a pulse. Weak, but there is one." The emergency doctors arrived. One of the doctors approached Ethan. "How did she get to you?" "The police. They brought her in as a body from a rural area, with no identification. I just lowered my head, my gloves stained with blood, my hands shaking, my eyes filled with tears. It was going to be the autopsy. It had already begun." Silence. The room, although filled with the sound of machines and quick footsteps, seemed to breathe that moment with them. "Didn't anyone notice she was alive?" someone asked. "Her heartbeat was very weak," he replied, almost in a whisper. "But I felt it. I swear I felt it. The minutes that followed were quiet chaos. They hooked her up to machines, IVs, ventilators, bright lights. Everyone moved carefully, but Ethan didn't leave there. He stayed leaning against the wall, watching every gesture, every attempt. The girl didn't respond, her eyes closed, her little arms limp, her small chest rising and falling, almost unnoticeable. But there was life, and that was all that mattered. Now, one of the residents accidentally said something that the doctor heard. It was a misdiagnosis. It could have been fatal. Ethan listened, but said nothing, because deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. There was something beyond medicine, something in that little body that was crying out for help. And he, without knowing how he had heard it. The intensive care doctor finally arrived and said, "She's in a deep coma, but she's alive. We're going to stabilize her and take her to intensive care." Ethan took a deep breath for the first time in many minutes. He looked at the girl who now had wires everywhere, a mask on her face. And yet there she was, looking more alive than anything he had seen in the last few years. A miracle, perhaps, or the most serious mistake of someone's life. But for him it was an opportunity, a chance to make things right, a chance to save her. While the doctors worked around the girl, connecting tubes, adjusting monitors, and saying technical words that sounded cold throughout the room, Ethan stood there still, as if he were part of the scene. His heart was still beating as if he were running, but his eyes were only on her. Only on her. The small body, now clean of the blood he himself had let out, the brown skin with a few bruises, the weak but steady breathing, and the wet, tangled hair still hid something. He leaned over, not quite sure why, and ran his fingers carefully through her hair. That's when he saw it. A faint glimmer almost hidden by the dirt, a thin thread hanging from the girl's neck. A necklace. "Wait," he murmured. He carefully moved the fabric of the dirty dress and slowly pulled out what appeared to be a silver chain. It was darkened, marked by time, but still intact. In the center, a small star with a slightly bent tip held the piece between his fingers and turned it over. On the back, engraved in small letters, was a word: Isabel, nothing else. His heart beat faster, as if that name said much more than it seemed. Isabel, no last name, no date, no clue as to where she came from, who she was, who was waiting for her. But at that moment, it was as if that little piece of metal said everything, as if it screamed, "I am someone, I have a name, I have a history." Ethan held the necklace carefully, running his thumb over the name, as if trying to understand what cannot be asked. One of the nurses approached him in a low voice. "Did you find anything?" He showed her without saying a word. She nodded with her eyes. "It could be important. I'll make a note of it." But Ethan didn't answer. He continued to hold that necklace as if it were a key, as if it would somehow open a path to the truth. Isabel repeated softly. The word was almost lost amid the noise of the machines, and in that instant, something changed inside him. He still didn't know what to do. He didn't know where she came from or why she was there. But now he had a name. And with a name comes hope. Ethan returned to the morgue later, his hands still cold and his head heavy. The image of the girl lying in the ICU would not leave his mind, breathing with difficulty, so small, so fragile, so alive. He sat down at the old desk, grabbed the documents that had been delivered with the body, and began to reread them more carefully. He needed to understand how that girl had ended up there, who had left her in that field, and why. At the top of the report was a stamp from the Willow Creek Police Department, a short, dry report. It stated that an unidentified girl had been found at 3:17 a.m. in a rural area about 40 minutes from downtown, near Highway 148. Ethan read that sentence 2 or 3 times, near Highway 148, He just turned the page. He was hoping to see more details, coordinates, a reference to a mile marker on the highway, the name of a small house or a nearby ranch, but nothing. "What place is that?" he muttered. The report said she was found apparently lifeless, with no signs of external violence, and classified as a low priority. The name of the person who filed the report was Officer C. Jimenez. But there were no attachments with photos of the location, no description of what was around it, no witnesses, no clues, nothing. Ethan frowned. That wasn't normal. He went back to the computer in the morgue and logged into the missing persons system. He typed Isabel. Dozens of records appeared, but none with ages between 7 and 12 in the San Pedro del Valle region. Isabel tried other filters. She expanded the search to neighboring states. She even tried recent dates of disappearance. Nothing. She put her cold coffee aside and stared at the screen with the cursor blinking. Then she grabbed the phone and called the police juvenile division. "Good afternoon. This is Dr. Ethan Rivas from the morgue. I'd like to talk to someone about the case of the girl brought in last night without identification." "Yes, doctor. The one found in the field, right?" "Exactly. Do you have any reports of recent disappearances? Anyone looking for her?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. "Nothing so far. No calls, no reports. We've already run it through the national system, but there are no matches." Ethan sighed. He looked back at the name engraved on the necklace. "Isabel. Her name is Isabel. As you say, she had a necklace. She was wearing it with that name engraved on a silver star." More silence. "That wasn't reported at the time of the discovery." "Well, report it now because this girl has a name and deserves to be found, or deserves to have someone come looking for her." "Yes, sir. We'll update the information." He hung up, slammed the phone down, and stood there staring at the papers scattered across the table. A girl alone in a field, with no ID, no injuries, no one asking about her. How can a 6-year-old girl disappear like that? How is it that no one notices? Doesn't anyone miss her? Ethan rested his head in his hands and for the first time in many years felt something old rising in his throat. It wasn't anger or fear. It was sadness. A deep sadness for a girl who seemed not to exist, and for a world that seemed not to see her. Dawn was breaking over the hospital. The corridors were empty, the lights dimmed, casting shadows across the walls. Most of the night shift workers were nodding off in chairs or drinking coffee to stay awake. But Ethan couldn't sleep. No, that night he had stayed at the hospital. It wasn't his shift or his responsibility, but he couldn't leave. The image of Isabel intubated in the ICU, that little collar with her name on it, the silence of the police. It all weighed on his chest like a stone. He decided to take one last look. He walked slowly down the corridor of the intensive care unit when he noticed something strange. A woman standing alone, leaning against the glass wall, was standing the room where Isabel lay in a coma. She didn't move, just stared. Ethan stopped too. He watched her from a distance. She was thin. She looked tired. Her hair was messy, her clothes dirty and wrinkled, her hands clasped over her chest and eyes. Her eyes looked like they had been there for a long time. Crying silently, he approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. "Ma'am," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper. The woman jumped a little. She looked at him fearfully, as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. "I just wanted to see her," he said in a trembling voice. "Do you know this girl?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "Do you know who she is?" The woman covered her mouth with her hands. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. Instead, she took 2 steps back. She looked back at Isabel inside, with a look so deep, so full of pain, that Ethan's throat tightened. "Wait, please," he said, holding out his hand. "If you know anything, this girl needs help." She shook her head. crying, and then turned and ran. Without saying another word, she ran barefoot down the hallway, disappearing around the corner before he could react. Ethan ran after her, but when he reached the first-floor door, there was no one there. No trace, no footsteps, nothing. He returned to the hallway slowly, his heart pounding. He stood in front of the ICU room again and looked at Isabel. Who was she? "Hey," he whispered. "Why did she come here? Why did she leave like that?" Isabel slept as if she knew nothing, but that woman's tears were real. The pain in her eyes was real too, and that only made the mystery grow. And the certainty that this girl wasn't just a case, she was part of something much bigger, something that was still hidden. The next day dawned cloudy with the sky covered in a thick gray, the kind that makes the air feel heavier and thoughts more confused. Ethan arrived early at the hospital, but he didn't go straight to the intensive care unit. He stopped by the administration office, looked at the same papers as always, and instead of feeling like he was doing the right thing, he felt a restlessness that wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right. The girl, the necklace, the mysterious woman, the police report with missing information. He grabbed a quick coffee, grabbed his car keys, and left without telling anyone. It wasn't a professional decision. It was something stronger. It was personal. Highway 148 was about 40 minutes away, crossing dry areas with few places where there was cell phone reception and almost no houses nearby. It was a road for someone who wanted to disappear or hide something. He drove carefully with the radio turned off, his face serious, the name Isabel ringing in his head over and over again. He stopped the car on the side of the road near the vague description he had read in the report. He got out slowly, feeling the strong wind. The vegetation was sparse, the ground dry, with pebbles and broken branches. She walked around for a while, looking at the ground. She was looking for anything that perhaps no one had noticed. And then, near a low bush, she saw it. She bent down, slowly. It was a piece of cloth caught on a thorny branch. She pulled it out carefully. It was a piece of a girl's dress with faded star patterns. It had stains, some already dark and dry. There was no doubt. He held the rag carefully, almost as if he were touching the girl. He felt a lump in his throat, and a few meters ahead, he noticed something even stranger. Footprints, small, irregular, as if someone had been running barefoot. Some were very distinct, as if the person had tripped. Others were lost among the branches, but they were there. He bent down and ran his hand over the ground. The girl had been here. She had run. Maybe she had escaped. From where? From whom? Ethan looked around. The field was silent, empty, but from somewhere came a very strong feeling, almost suffocating, as if that land still held the fear that she had felt. He stayed there on his knees with the rag in his hands, the wind ruffling his hair, and his eyes fixed on that invisible path of tiny footsteps. Isabel had fought to survive. She had tried to escape, and now she was alive. But alone, in a world she didn't know where she came from, and he could no longer ignore it. Ethan continued silently along the dry paths, his eyes fixed on the ground, and the blood-stained rag still clenched in his hands. The footprints disappeared and reappeared among the bushes, as if the girl had run aimlessly, stumbling, trying to hide from something. With each step, the wind whistled louder, and the sky seemed to weigh heavier on him. It was then, as he passed a group of crooked trees, that he saw a building in the distance, an old lonely house, almost invisible in the tall grass that surrounded it. The walls were peeling, the roof was full of holes, and the windows were broken. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but there was something there, something that called him inside. He approached slowly. The front door was ajar, rattling in the wind. The smell inside was a mixture of dust, dampness, and silence. Ethan took a deep breath and went inside. The rooms were small and dark, the walls stained, the floor creaking under his feet. In one corner of the living room was an old mattress on the floor with thin blankets, as if someone had slept there recently. Further on, a broken table, 2 chairs, and in a corner, a torn cardboard box. It was then that he saw it. On the floor, near the wall, was a child's rug covered in dirt and toys, some cars, pieces of a doll, a children's book wet from the rain that must have come in through a crack. And in the middle of all that, an old doll, dirty but complete, and hanging from the doll's neck was a necklace, the same necklace, a small silver star with the name Isabel engraved on it, just like the one he found around the girl's neck. Ethan knelt on the floor, grabbed the doll with his hands trembling, looked at the star, confirmed the name. It was the same. It was hers. There, at that moment, everything inside him stopped. That girl was there. She played there. She slept on that mattress. She was a girl there. Maybe she cried there. Maybe she was hurt. He ran his hand over the rug as if he wanted to feel her presence, and he felt it. That house had been a home, even if only for a short time, even if it wasn't safe, even if it was full of pain. Ethan remained kneeling for a while. The smell, the toys, the necklace, everything said it. She had been here, someone had been here, and now he was sure. That girl hadn't appeared in the world by chance. She was running away from something, and maybe what she was running from was still close by. And now he was sure. That girl didn't appear in the world by chance. She was running away from something, and maybe what she was running from was still nearby. Ethan walked slowly through the rooms of the house, trying to understand the pieces of life that were still there. Nothing looked recent, but it wasn't that old either, as if someone had been living there until a few days ago. A piece of bread with jam on it on the counter, a child's blanket rolled up in a corner, a small empty plastic bottle lying on the floor. It was then, as he ran his hand over one of the cracked walls, that he felt something strange. Part of the wood sank a little, as if there were a hidden cavity. He pulled it carefully. The old wood creaked. Behind it was a small, dark space, and inside, wrapped in a torn plastic bag, was a notebook. Ethan took it out carefully. It was an old pink school notebook with a star drawn on the cover. He sat down on the floor among the broken toys and opened it. The first pages had simple drawings, little houses, hearts, a smiling doll next to a figure with long hair. Then came words, phrases written in a girl's handwriting, crooked, with mistakes. But what they said left no doubt. I don't want to be hit anymore. My mom cries every night. I'm scared when he yells. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. He felt a lump in his throat. The words hurt. It was like hearing Isabel's voice whispering, asking for help. He turned more pages, drawings of a house with closed windows, a girl behind bars, then a thick black scribble that covered almost the entire page, like a silent scream. He hugged the notebook to his chest and stood there for a few minutes in silence. That wasn't just paper. It was proof. It was a memory. It was the heart of a girl trying to survive. He got up, shook the dust off his clothes, and left the house. He went straight back to the city. He walked with steady steps to the police station, the notebook in his hands. He asked to speak to someone from the Child Protection Department. When he was finally attended to, he placed the notebook on the table. This was written by a girl named Isabel, and she is still alive. The police officer looked at the notebook with a serious, suspicious expression. Where did you get this? In an abandoned house near Highway 148. I found it following her footprints. She escaped from there. The man sighed, scratched his head, took the notebook, and flipped through a few pages. Dr. Ethan, I understand your concern, but you shouldn't have done that. This is already a sensitive case, and you're a medical examiner. You have a different role to play." Ethan looked at him firmly. He didn't raise his voice, but he spoke with a weight that came from his soul. "My role is to be human." The policeman closed the notebook. He took a deep breath. "We'll keep an eye on it, but you'd better stay out of it." Ethan left with a heavy heart. He felt he had done the right thing, but he also knew that he was now touching on something much bigger. And deep down, it wasn't fear he felt. It was sadness. Because now he knew Isabel and her mother had lived there, and someone had hurt them. The next night, the hospital was quieter than ever. The rain fell slowly on the windows, dripping slowly, as if each drop brought a piece of the pain that haunted that place. Ethan sat in the ICU hallway with a cup of cold coffee in his hands, and his eyes fixed on the floor, the image of the house, the doll, the notebook, everything coming back to his mind, as if demanding attention. It was then that he heard footsteps, soft, quick footsteps, almost like someone who didn't want to be seen. He slowly raised his head. It was her, the woman, the same one from the other night. Her clothes were still dirty, her hair wet from the rain, but her eyes now had something different. There was still fear, but also something like determination. She walked straight up to the glass of the UCEI. She stood there, staring at Isabel, intubated, asleep. Her hands trembled as they touched the glass as if she wanted to break through it with her heart. Ethan approached her calmly. "You're back." She turned toward him with tears streaming down her face, but this time she didn't run away. She took a deep breath and spoke. Her voice was weak and broken. "Isabel is my daughter." He stopped. He felt the world slow down for a moment. Her eyes told the truth, a truth that hurt. "My name is Rosa," she continued, shaking. "They forced me to keep quiet." Ethan said nothing, just nodded his head, inviting her to sit down. She hesitated, but accepted. She sat down slowly on the metal chair next to him, her eyes fixed on his daughter. "We lived in that house. Hidden." Rosa swallowed hard. He was violent, very violent. A man no one dared to confront. A local drug dealer. He used the house to store bad things, money, weapons, and he used us to look like a family in case anyone suspected anything. She began to cry, but without making a sound. It was a quiet cry, the kind that comes out when you've cried too much and your body is tired. I wanted to escape. I wanted to get out of there with Isabel, but he hit me, locked me up, and she saw it. She saw everything. Rosa covered her face with her hands. She ran alone into the night, and I couldn't follow her. She was badly hurt. I screamed, I begged, but he wouldn't let me. Ethan felt his chest burn. He looked at Rosa and saw not only a desperate mother, but a woman broken inside. And yet, alive, a survivor. "I thought she was dead," Rosa murmured in a voice that was almost gone, until I heard it on the radio. "A girl found in a nameless field. And then I came. I ran here last time, hiding in fear, but I needed to see if it was her." Ethan took her hand carefully. "She's alive, Rosa. Weak, but alive. And now she knows you're back." She began to sob, resting her forehead on the glass of the ambulance and whispering as if Isabel could hear her. "Forgive me, my girl. Forgive me." And there, in that wet dawn, with the hospital asleep around them, two pains met, that of the intubated daughter and that of the mother silenced for so long. But now the truth was beginning to come out. Rosa was sitting next to Ethan, still looking through the glass of the intensive care unit. Her eyes were fixed on her daughter. Isabel looked so small there, surrounded by wires and machines, that it was hard to believe that this little girl had fought so hard to stay alive. She breathed deeply with difficulty, trying to hold back the tears that had nowhere to fall. Her hands were shaking, dirty, her fingers intertwined on her lap. After a moment of silence, she opened the old bag she carried close to her body. It was a faded cloth bag with a broken zipper and marks from a difficult life. From inside, she took out a crumpled plastic bag, and inside it, a hospital bracelet. She gave it to Ethan slowly, her eyes filled with tears. "I've kept this since she was born." It was the only thing I could hide from him. The bracelet was simple, the kind given to newborns, white with blue letters that were almost faded, but still legible. Saul Mendoza. R. Ethan ran his fingers over the name carefully and looked at Rosa. She nodded slightly without saying anything. The truth was there between them, needing no explanation. "It says here she was born in Arizona. That's where it all started," Rosa replied, her voice breaking. "We lived in a small town. It was just my mom, me, and then Isabel. But life got tough. My mom got sick and I went to look for work. I met a man who promised to help. He said he had a house, food, that he would take care of us." She took a deep breath, closing her eyes, as if she wanted to erase the memory. "It was a lie. He took us far away to the other side of the state and then brought me here. I don't even know where I am, doctor. I only know that I could never leave. He knows where my family lives, my acquaintances." Ethan squeezed the bracelet between his hands. It was more than a memory. It was proof of everything. It was the thread that connected that girl with no past to the wounded woman now crying in front of the glass. "You kept this all this time, hidden in the bottom of one of her dolls. It was the only thing she had to remember, that we were once free." Silence filled the hallway again. All that could be heard was the VIP of the machines inside the room. Ethan placed the bracelet carefully on Rosa's lap. "She'll want to see this when she wakes up." She smiled a painful but genuine smile. "I just want her to live, to smile again, that's all." And there, in that simple moment, between a wounded mother and a doctor broken inside, something stronger than any medical record was born. A bond was formed, and a truth that could no longer be ignored. That night, Ethan returned home for the first time in days. His body was tired, his mind was racing. The image of Isabel, the bracelet, Rosa's eyes, everything was stuck to his skin. But what hurt the most was what no one could see. He threw himself on the couch without even changing his clothes. He didn't turn on the TV, he didn't grab his cell phone. He just lay there staring at the ceiling as if waiting for the silence to say something. Outside, it was raining softly, almost like a whisper, and little by little his eyes closed. Sleep came heavily, and with it, the nightmare. Ethan was driving. It was raining heavily. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up. In the back seat, a sweet little voice was singing softly. It was Camille, his daughter, 7 years old, her hair tied back with a pink ribbon, always laughing. She loved to sing. She made up songs out of thin air. "Dad, faster," she said, laughing. "Slow down, princess. It's raining hard," he replied. Suddenly there was a loud noise, a flash, a truck. The brakes failed. Everything spun. Ethan woke up screaming. He sat up in the armchair, his chest heaving, his face drenched in sweat and tears. He sat there for a while in silence. His eyes were lost, his breathing ragged. He ran his hand over his face, over his chest. He tried to return to the present. He tried to get out of there. The nightmare always came back. Almost every night, for the past 8 years, Camille died instantly. He couldn't do anything. He was a doctor, but at the moment that mattered most, he was just a dad. A dad who held his daughter's body in his arms, praying for a miracle. And it didn't come. Since that day, he never smiled again. He never sang again. He was never the same until now, because since Isabel appeared, something inside him began to hurt again. But it was a different kind of pain. It wasn't just loss, it was also hope. He saw in her the Camille he couldn't save, the innocence, the strength, the light. And maybe, without realizing it, he was being pulled back to life. Isabel, intubated in that cold room with the collar around her neck and her tiny fingers, was giving him something he didn't know he had anymore. The ability to feel, to protect, to love. Ethan got up again slowly, walked to the window, looked at the sleeping city, the distant lights, the sky that continued to cry, and whispered to himself, his eyes filled with tears. "Forgive me, Camille. I didn't make it with you. But with her I will, because now he knew. That girl wasn't just a case. She was a new beginning." Ethan spent the entire night thinking, unable to sleep. Sitting at the kitchen table, with Isabel's notebook open in front of him, he felt a weight on his chest that was no longer just sadness. It was anger. It was rage. That girl escaped from hell. That mother endured in silence. And even though they had evidence in their hands, no one did anything. Everything was silence. Everything was slow. He opened his laptop, looked for an old contact, a local journalist he knew, a serious man who had already reported on serious issues before. He sent him a message, and they agreed to meet. That same day, he went to the modest newsroom of a neighborhood newspaper. He entered with his head down, his notebook wrapped in a plastic bag. The journalist, a middle-aged man named Samuel, greeted him in a small room with yellowed papers on the walls and the smell of printer ink. "What brings you here, doctor?" Ethan put the notebook on the table. "This was written by a girl. Her name is Isabel. She's in the hospital in a coma. She survived and escaped from a place where she and her mother were abused. And that place is linked to a dangerous man that no one wants to confront." Samuel leafed through the notebook slowly. His face changed with each page. The drawings, the phrases, the childish desperation written on the paper. "This is serious, very serious, and no one wants to do anything. The police told me not to get involved, but if I keep quiet, it's like leaving her alone again." Samuel got up from his chair, went to the back of the room, and returned with a simple camera. "Can you tell me everything? And do you authorize us to publish it?" "Yes, but I want you to tell the truth. No exaggeration. I want you to see the pain of that girl." They recorded the interview. Ethan spoke calmly, but with a steady gaze. He told them about the necklace, the house, the doll, the fake wall. He showed them the drawings. He read sentences that Isabel had written with a trembling voice. When he finished, Samuel turned off the camera and shook his hand. "Thank you for trusting us. The article will be published tomorrow." Ethan returned home, feeling calmer. For the first time, he felt he had done the right thing. But that same night, the home phone rang. He answered, thinking it was a colleague from the hospital. There was silence for a few seconds. Then a hoarse, dry voice intruded where it shouldn't have. Dr. Ethan froze, saying nothing. The voice continued firmly. "Shut your mouth or you'll regret it." The call was cut off. He stood there with the phone in his hand, his heart beating fast. It was no longer just a case. It was no longer just a girl. Now it was war. And he knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. The day after the report was filed, the hospital was quieter than usual when he arrived. Ethan got there early and went straight to the ICU, as he had done every day for the past few days. Isabel was still the same, fragile, covered in wires, but alive. He smiled when he saw that her breathing was a little more stable, but one glance at the bench in the hallway was enough to tell him that something was wrong. Rosa wasn't there. She never missed a day. Since she had returned, she spent entire days by the glass. She slept sitting up with her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on her daughter. She only left when someone almost forced her to. Ethan asked at the reception desk, "The lady who always stays here, the mother of the girl in the ICU, has anyone seen her today?" The receptionist looked at him confused. "No, doctor. I don't think she's come in yet." That was strange. Ethan went up to the dining room, searched the hallways, the bathrooms, and returned to the ground floor. Nothing. He went to the nurse's station. He asked for her name. A young nurse, looking around as if afraid of being overheard, approached him and spoke softly. "Doctor, I shouldn't say this, but I saw 2 men take her out of here last night." "What? What men?" "They weren't wearing uniforms. They were dressed in black. They grabbed her by the arm and she looked scared, like she wanted to say something, but she was afraid. They took her out the side exit." Ethan was frozen. "Did you call security?" "Yes, but they told me it was an order from above, that everything was under control. Then they asked me not to say anything." Ethan ran out, went straight to the hospital administration, and demanded to see the security cameras. A worker tried to stall him, saying he couldn't, that he needed authorization from the police. "Then call the police," he replied firmly. But when he entered the surveillance room and got them to show him part of the videos, his blood ran cold. There she was, Rosa, in the second-floor hallway, walking slowly with her head down. 2 men catch up with her. One grabs her arm. She hesitates, looks around. She seems to want to scream, but she can't. The 2 men take her to the back exit, quickly, quietly, without leaving a trace. And the most chilling thing is that none of them were wearing uniforms. Ethan paused the video, rewound it, and looked at the faces again. He still didn't feel like he had seen it before, but he couldn't remember where. He printed out the images. He went to the police station. "I have proof that they took her. Look at this." The police officer looked, frowned. "Doctor, there's no record of any operation yesterday. No escort? Nothing. And there's no record that this woman was in custody." "Then where is she?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Where is Isabel's mother?" The police officer looked away. "We'll look into it." Ethan left the police station feeling like he had thrown the evidence in the trash. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to see. But now he could see. And the worst part was knowing. Rosa screamed silently in front of everyone, and still no one did anything. The end of the afternoon brought a different kind of silence to the hospital. The light coming through the windows was cold, almost blue. Ethan was in the hallway, still with the images of Rosa in his mind, his eyes tired from trying so hard, from knocking on doors that wouldn't open. When he heard the alarm, a high-pitched sound coming from the ICU, he ran. He entered the room without thinking. The monitors were beeping. The heart rate graph was rising and falling, trembling. The artificial breathing was losing its rhythm. The nurses ran. A doctor on duty arrived right behind them. "The saturation is dropping," said one of them. "The pressure is very low." Ethan crossed the room and went straight to the stretcher. Isabel was there, smaller than before, her lips a little purple, her hands still, her forehead sweaty, her little chest rising and falling with difficulty, as if life were slipping away. Slowly. "No, no, please," he whispered. He took her hand. "Fight, my girl, fight, please." His eyes filled with tears. "You can't give up now. You can't." The ICU doctor gave orders firmly, but Ethan wasn't listening anymore. Everything around him became blurry. The sound of the machines became distant. All he could see was her, Isabel, that little girl who appeared like a body, who fought alone in the woods, who survived the impossible, who had a necklace with his name on it, a hidden past, and who was now there, slipping away through his fingers. "Stay with me, Isabel," he cried. "Can you hear me?" "I'm here. I'm with you." Her hand didn't move, but he held it tightly, as if her presence could bring her back. Tears fell down Ethan's face, wetting the white sheets, mixed with the anguish of not being able to do more, of being a doctor and still feeling helpless. The monitor beeped softly once more, but it didn't stop. Isabel was still there, though weak, though in crisis, and Ethan kneeling beside her, not thinking about rules, not caring who saw him, just repeated, "You're strong. You've beaten this before. Don't give up now, please." The room, filled with tension, fell silent for a second, as if everyone there were clinging to that little hand and to the heart of a man who hadn't cried for anyone in years. Until now, Ethan returned to that old house with heavy feet, but with an even heavier heart. Isabel's crisis made everything more urgent. He knew that if he wanted to make a difference, it was now. He needed answers, proof, something to break through the wall of silence and fear surrounding the case. The sky was dark and cloudy, as if the world were about to fall apart. He entered the house carefully, smelling the same odor of dampness and abandonment. But this time, he entered differently, hurriedly, with a purpose. He went straight to the room where he had found the toys. The rag doll was still in the same place, with a necklace just like Isabel's, but there was something there he hadn't noticed the first time. A strange weight, something in the doll's chest that didn't make sense. He grabbed it tightly and touched it carefully. There's something inside. He took a knife out of his pocket and carefully cut the seam of the doll's belly. Inside was a piece of paper folded many times, already yellowed, but intact. He opened it slowly. It was a handwritten sheet of paper with names, addresses, dates, children. Next to some names it said, "Delivered," next to others, "Lost." 1 or 2. He disappeared. Everything was written quickly, as if someone had done it in a hurry, but it was clear that Isabel wasn't the only one. It wasn't the only case. Ethan swallowed hard, took out his cell phone, took pictures of everything, then left the house, got in his car, and drove straight to the newspaper office where he had already been. He handed the paper to Samuel. "Here's the proof. Show this. Share it." Now no one can pretend they didn't see the article. It was published that same day. The headline read in large letters, "Child abuse ring hidden in Willow Creek farmhouse," with pictures of the doll, the notebook, the bracelet, and now the list. The whole town saw it and couldn't ignore it. Early the next day, the state attorney general's office took action. Orders were carried out. Patrol cars entered nearby properties. They arrested 3 people that same day, one of them the most important. The police found Rosa beaten, weak but alive. She was in a dark room, with her wrists tied and her face swollen. When they saw her, the woman cried for the first time in peace. She knew they had come, that someone hadn't given up on her. Ethan was at the hospital when he got the call. "We found her, doctor. She's alive. They're bringing her in today." He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and let the tears flow freely. Relief, pain, gratitude, all mixed together. Hours later, back in the ICU, he entered the room. Isabel was still asleep, but her little face looked more colorful. The doctor called him aside. "She's responding slowly, but yes, her body is fighting." Ethan looked at the girl with affection, took her little hand again, as he had done during the crisis. "You felt it, didn't you? You felt that she was alive, too." And there, between the cold light of the ICU and the hope that was finally emerging, Ethan knew. This was only the beginning. But for the first time, there was light. The morning came gently, with a golden light streaming through the windows of the intensive care unit. The air felt lighter that day. The smell of alcohol, the noise of the machines, everything was the same, but something had changed. Ethan entered the room as he always did, his heart heavy, but with a new feeling, difficult to explain. Isabel's stretcher was still there, surrounded by wires and machines. She still looked asleep with her long eyelashes, her chest rising slowly. But there was something different. Ethan approached silently, pulled up a chair, sat down beside her as he did every day, and took her little hand carefully, as if he were holding a flower bud. He stood there looking at her without rushing, just feeling her presence, just waiting. And then it happened. Slowly, almost as if it were a dream, her eyes opened. Two dark eyes, still tired, still a little lost, but alive. Alive in a way that broke any silence. She blinked once, twice, tried to move her head, but she was weak. Her gaze swept across the room and stopped on him. Ethan didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just smiled. A smile full of tears. A smile that hadn't come out in years. She looked at him for several seconds without fear, without crying, as if she recognized him, as if she knew deep down that this man had been with her all along. "Isabel," he whispered, "my girl." She didn't answer, but her eyes said it all. And it was there, at that moment, in that meeting of two broken hearts, that something was reborn. Isabel opened her eyes to the world, and Ethan opened his eyes to life. After so long, he felt again, and it was a miracle. The room was silent, the kind of silence that only comes after a long struggle. Isabel is now awake, her eyes still sunken, but alive. Ethan was beside her, silent, holding her little hand. He tried to be strong, but the emotion on his face said it all. It was then that the door opened slowly. Rosa, weak, with bandages on her arms, her face still marked, her eyes red from crying, but standing, walking, alive, took one step, then another. Her legs were shaking. Her heart seemed to want to jump out of her chest. When she finally entered completely, she stopped. She looked at her daughter, lying in that bed, so big for such a small body, and her eyes filled with tears again. Isabel, for a second, understood. She blinked slowly. She couldn't believe her eyes. "Mom!" The voice came out softly, hoarse, like a sigh of life. Rosa put her hands over her mouth. "Soyoso." It was as if that sound, that word, broke everything that was still stuck inside. "My love, my little girl," she whispered. Isabel began to cry, and Rosa moved toward her slowly, as if afraid of waking her from a dream. Ethan stepped aside, moving away respectfully. The emotion in her eyes said that this moment was not hers. It was theirs. Rosa leaned over the bed. Isabel raised her arms. The two embraced each other tightly, desperately, lovingly. "Forgive me, my girl. Forgive me," Rosa repeated between sobos. Isabel said nothing, just cried on her mother's chest. The cry of a girl who waited too long, who fought too hard, who was almost forgotten. The pain did not go away. The scars did not disappear. But for the first time, they were no longer alone. For the first time, love was stronger than fear. And in that embrace, in that reunion full of pain and hope, a new story began. A story of rebuilding, of care, of forgiveness, of mother and daughter. Finally, together again. Night fell with a different silence. The intensive care unit was already quieter. Isabel slept tiredly. After a day filled with tests and emotions, Rosa sat next to the bed with her arms crossed, looking at her daughter with that mother's gaze that never blinks, that never rests. Ethan was nearby, leaning against the wall, watching everything without saying much. His presence was already part of that place. After a while, Rosa turned around. Her eyes were dark, sunken, tired, but there was a determination in them, something mature, firm, that came from someone who had lived through things she shouldn't have had to live through. She took a deep breath. "Doctor, can I talk to you?" Ethan approached, pulled up a chair, and sat down next to her. "Of course." Rosa looked at Isabel, then at him. Her voice came out soft, almost without strength. "I know it's not fair to ask this. I know you've already done more than you should have, but I need to talk." Ethan didn't answer. He just waited. "You know, Mama, if something ever happens to me..." She swallowed. She wanted to know if he would take care of her. Ethan felt his stomach knot up, his heart squeeze in his chest. He hadn't expected that. "Not like that, Rosa. I'm not saying I'm going to die, or that I'm giving up. But you never know, right? Look at everything that happened. We lived in fear. They took me. They hurt me. They made me disappear. I only came back because I was lucky. But what if one day I don't come back?" She ran her hand over her face, trying not to cry. "I just want to be sure that if one day I can't, she won't be left alone again, because she's already been alone, and I can't bear to think about that again." Ethan lowered his eyes and remained silent for a while. His mind went back to everything they had been through. The morgue, the necklace, the race, the crisis, the crying, the hug. And there, without saying a word, he understood. He was already taking care of her. He already felt responsible. He already felt love. Rosa said with a trembling voice, "I haven't been a dad for a long time. I lost my daughter years ago, and since then I haven't felt that way until now." She looked at him in surprise. "I don't know what will happen tomorrow, but if one day you can't..." He took a deep breath. "I'll be here. I'll take care of her, as if she were my own." Tears welled up in Rosa's eyes, but they were different tears. Tears of relief and gratitude. She grabbed his hand and squeezed it tightly. "Thank you, doctor. Really." And there, in the silence of a hospital room, far from any plans or paperwork, a promise was born. A promise made with the heart. A few weeks passed. Every day, Isabel grew stronger. She was already smiling, already talking softly to her mother, already squeezing Ethan's hand tightly. And Rosa, still scarred, still wounded inside, but now with something in her eyes that she didn't have before. Hope. Justice was finally moving forward. After the complaints, the evidence, the commotion, a new phase began. A prosecutor took the case seriously. He did what no one had done before. He looked at it with humanity. Rosa and Isabel were included in a protection program. They were given new documents, a new address, a new opportunity. Ethan was present throughout the process, went with them to the hearing, sat next to them, signed as a witness, greeted the judge, calmly explained every detail, not as a forensic scientist, not as a technician, but as a man. Days later, he helped pack the few things they had in the hospital. A couple of changes of clothes, a patched-up doll, the star necklace now clean, hanging around Isabel's neck, and the notebook. She decided to keep the rose as a reminder of what had been and what she would never do again. The trip was uneventful. A small town in another state. A simple, quiet place, far from everything. Ethan drove them there. He left them at a house with a porch, in a quiet neighborhood. The windows had white curtains. The yard was dirt, but for the first time, it was a home. "Is this it?" Rosa asked with a shy smile. "This is it," replied Ethan, getting out of the car. Isabel ran to the wooden gate. It was short, half crooked, but she leaned against it with her eyes shining. "Mom, are we going to live here?" "Yes, my love." Ethan stood watching them go inside. Rosa waved to him. Isabel ran back and hugged his legs. "Are you going to come visit us?" He smiled. "He'll come whenever you want." And so began the new chapter. Ethan returned to the city, but he never went far. He called every week. sent gifts and photos. Sometimes he drove for hours just to have coffee on that porch. He brought sweets, books, stories. He was no longer just the doctor. He was part of their lives. And there, in that little corner of the world, between simple glances and quiet afternoons, 3 broken hearts began to heal together. It was on a typical afternoon, one of those afternoons when time seems to pass slowly. When Ethan received the message, he was at home sitting on the terrace drinking warm coffee and reading a newspaper he wasn't paying attention to. His cell phone vibrated, and he looked at it without rushing. It was pink. "I wanted you to see this. It's from today." The message came with a photo. Ethan tapped the screen and froze. The image showed Isabel in her new uniform, a white blouse, her hair tied back with colorful ribbons. She was in the yard of a simple school next to a mural made of colored paper. Behind her, written in child's handwriting, was a sign. Family Day. In the center of the sign were several photos of children with their fathers, each with a handwritten phrase. Isabel's had a small cardboard sign taped to it with tape, decorated with hearts. It read, "My daddy from the bottom of my heart, Dr. Ethan." The world stopped. Ethan held the phone with his hands trembling. Isabel's had a little pink cardboard sign stuck on it with tape, decorated with hearts. It read, "My daddy dearest, Dr. Ethan." The world stopped. Ethan held the cell phone with both hands. His chest tightened as if he couldn't breathe. The coffee grew cold on the table. He stared at the screen as if he were witnessing a miracle, and it was. He hadn't cried like that in a long time. The image of that little girl standing there, her eyes full of sparkle, with that shy but confident smile, telling the whole world, there, in front of my classmates, teachers, and strangers, I have a dad. He wasn't born to me, but he chose to stay. Ethan held the cell phone close to his chest, closed his eyes, and there, alone on the terrace, he let the tears fall. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude, because he knew that no diploma, no position, no medical glory in the whole world could compare to that little piece of cardboard. That was everything. It was pure love. It was an answer. It was a cure. The morning after that photo was taken, Ethan arrived at the hospital with a different kind of weight on his shoulders. But this time it was a light weight, a good weight, like someone carrying a memory worth keeping. He walked down the hallways slowly, greeting each nurse, each colleague with a look full of things that are left unsaid. He went straight to the room where it all began. The cold, silent amphitheater with the same white walls, the same instruments lined up on the steel tray, but he no longer saw it with the same eyes. He sat down in the chair he had occupied for years, looked around, picked up the pen, and wrote his letter of resignation. After 27 years working there, he decided to close the cycle. Not because he was tired, but because he felt complete. He was whole. Finally. Ethan stood up, took off his gown slowly, folded it lovingly, left it on the table, and before leaving, he stopped in front of the central stretcher, where he had performed thousands of autopsies, the exact place where they had laid Isabel. That image would never be erased from his mind. He closed his eyes and whispered, "It was the last body, but the only one that gave me back my life. Because with Isabel, something he thought was dead inside him awakened the pain he had carried for so many years for not being able to save his daughter. He found a place of peace, an end, a new beginning. And there, in that cold room, where so many had cried in silence, where so many stories had ended, he finally closed his own. But not with sadness, with gratitude. Because sometimes life gives back even when we are no longer waiting. And if it were you, if on any given day, in the middle of your routine, you came across a body that the world had already forgotten, if life presented you with a difficult, urgent decision without instructions, Would you have the courage? Ethan did. He could have followed protocol, done what the paper said, put the final stamp, signed another cold report. But he didn't feel something. Something that only those who have had their hearts broken can recognize. He stopped, listened, and because of that, a girl lived, and more than that, he also came back to life. Isabel was much more than a medical case. She was an answer. She was a miracle. She was a new beginning for a man who had kept his own pain silent for years. A man who thought he had nothing left to give and discovered he could still love. Now tell me, if you were in his place, would you have heard that whisper? Would you have raced against time for someone no one knew? Would you have faced threats, fear, paperwork, and rules just to protect a little girl who didn't even know your name? Ethan was afraid. He had doubts, but he had something stronger. He had compassion, and that's why he saved 2 souls, hers and his own. Would you have had the courage to stand there and listen? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, subscribe, and join us for more stories about how a single act of kindness can change lives forever.